Have you ever felt that unspoken connection with someone, a silent language that vibrates between you, changing everything without a single word being said? Sometimes, the closest friendships hold the biggest secrets, and sometimes, even the most innocent moments can shatter the walls we've built around our hearts. Get ready to dive into a story of unspoken feelings, late-night confessions, and a friendship pushed to its very edge, all thanks to a very observant dog. I know it sounds weird, but I have to confess a late-night visit shattered the unspoken wall between us, flipping our whole world upside down in a single breathless instant. I remember exactly when it started, those small, almost imperceptible shifts in the air that made me question if things were really as simple as they seemed. It was a regular evening, one of those nights with a dark but clear sky, the stars twinkling softly in the stillness. Ethan and I were sprawled out on the old worn leather couch in his living room with Max, his golden retriever, dozing quietly by our feet. Max was snoring gently, his steady rhythm somehow making the silence even deeper. I'd known Ethan for years. We'd practically grown up together, bonding over school projects, late-night gaming sessions, and eventually, as we got older, those deep conversations you don't have with just anyone. Ours was the kind of friendship that runs deeper than blood, woven together by memories and moments only we understood. But lately, something had changed. It was hard to put my finger on it, and maybe that was part of the problem. Was it just me? Or had the silences grown charged? He'd brush his hand against mine when we passed each other, a fleeting touch that seemed too intentional to be an accident. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that I was reading too much into things, but that didn't stop the feeling from building, heavy and unshakable. Ethan said, breaking the quiet with his low voice, "Do you ever, think about what we're doing with our lives?" I laughed, more to mask my nerves than anything else. "Well, if you mean sitting here watching Max snore, then yeah, we're right on track." But he didn't laugh. Instead, he just looked at me with that steady gaze of his, as if he could see straight through me, right down to every thought I try to keep hidden. I shifted under his gaze, suddenly hyper-aware of every inch of space between us, or rather, the lack of it. The couch was big enough for us to sit apart, but somehow we always ended up pressed close together. He cleared his throat, looking down at his hands. Sometimes I feel like there's more we're not saying, like we keep dancing around something. His words hit like a shockwave, a jolt that made my heart skip a beat. I tried to shrug it off, laughing it away. "I think you've been watching too many rom-coms, man. Not everything's a hidden meaning." But my voice came out strained, too tight, and I knew he could tell. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "But what if there is something, huh? What if we're missing something important?" The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in, trapping us in this strange, unspoken moment. Max let out a soft whine, stretching his paws out between us, a reminder that we weren't alone, even though it felt like it. My mind raced, struggling to piece together a response that wouldn't betray the storm swirling inside me. Before I could think of anything to say, he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. I don't want to lose what we have, but sometimes I feel like I want more." The air between us grew thick, charged with something I didn't dare name. I forced myself to breathe, to keep my expression neutral, but my heart was pounding in my chest, each beat a reminder of everything I was too afraid to admit, even to myself. I looked away, focusing on Max, who was obliviously snoring through this life-altering moment. The silence stretched, heavy and unyielding, and I knew if I didn't say something, I might lose this moment forever. But the fear held me back, that relentless, gnawing fear of what might happen if I crossed that line. What if I ruined everything? What if it was just me clinging to a dream that would never be reality? Then, almost as if sensing my hesitation, Ethan leaned back, breaking the moment. He let out a deep breath, a sigh that seemed to carry all the unspoken words between us. "Forget it, man. I'm just talking nonsense." But I couldn't let it go, not now. Not after he'd come so close to opening up a door I'd been too scared to touch. "No, it's not nonsense. I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I know what you mean. He looked at me, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes, and suddenly the tension wasn't just in my head. It was real, and it was right here, staring me in the face. I wanted to reach out, to close the gap between us, to tell him that I felt it too, but then Max shifted his head, rolling into my lap, breaking the intensity of the moment with his innocent, carefree presence. We both laughed, the sound strained but welcome, a temporary escape from the depth of everything we weren't saying. I ran my hand through Max's fur, grounding myself in the familiar texture. The warmth of his presence, a comfort in the midst of the turmoil swirling around us. Maybe we should get some fresh air, Ethan suggested, standing up and stretching, clear our heads a little. I nodded, grateful for the excuse to step outside, away from the confines of the room and the weight of our almost confession. We slipped on our jackets, and Max bounded to his feet, ready for the adventure. As we stepped into the cool night air, the tension seemed to ease, dissipating into the crisp darkness, but I knew it hadn't vanished entirely. It was still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise again. We walked in silence, our footsteps crunching against the gravel path that led to the park at the end of the street. Max trotted ahead, his tail wagging as he explored every scent and shadow. I glanced at Ethan, catching a glimpse of his face in the dim light of the street lamp. And for a moment, I wondered if he was feeling the same thing I was, that strange, undeniable pull that made me want to be closer, to close the gap that had always been there, even in our closest moments. We reached the park, and Ethan leaned against the fence, staring out at the empty field. Max wandered off, sniffing around the bushes, blissfully unaware of the silent battle raging within me. Finally, Ethan turned to me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Do you ever think about what things would be like if we were different? If this was different? His question hung in the air, heavy and loaded with possibilities I couldn't ignore. I wanted to answer, to tell him everything that had been building up inside me for years, but the words caught in my throat, tangled in the fear and uncertainty that had held me back for so long. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but before I could speak, Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine in a way that felt deliberate, intentional. My heart raced, my mind spinning as I tried to process what was happening, what this could mean, and just as quickly as he'd closed the gap, he stepped back, leaving me standing there breathless and reeling. He turned away, his shoulders tense, and for a moment I thought he might say something, break the silence that had become as familiar as it was unbearable, but he didn't. Instead, he just looked out into the night, leaving me alone with 1,000 questions swirling in my mind. The days that followed were filled with a strange tension that neither of us could seem to shake. It was as if that night had opened a door we couldn't close. Every glance felt loaded with something heavier than friendship, something neither of us dared to name. But it lingered in every shared look, every accidental brush of hands, every quiet pause in our conversations. It wasn't long before we were both avoiding each other's eyes, pretending everything was the same, even though we both knew it wasn't, and yet we couldn't seem to stay away. Ethan and I had always been close, inseparable even. But now each moment spent together felt charged with a tension that was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was as if a silent agreement had formed between us, a pact we'd never spoken out loud. But somehow both understood. We were in uncharted territory, and there was no going back. One evening, after yet another awkward silence, I found myself on the edge of asking him outright. The question hung on my lips, daring me to let it out, to finally confront the growing unease between us. But before I could gather the courage, Ethan spoke, his voice low and strained. "Are you coming to the lake tomorrow?" The lake was our spot, a quiet refuge where we'd spent countless summer evenings skipping rocks and talking about everything and nothing. But now the invitation felt different. The lake wasn't just a place anymore. It was a promise, a commitment to confront whatever it was we'd been avoiding. "Yeah, I'll be there," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, even as my heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and fear. The next day, the air was thick with the scent of pine and the faint, earthy smell of damp soil as I made my way down to the lake. I could see Ethan already there, leaning against a tree with his hands shoved in his pockets, staring out at the water. His expression was unreadable, his face bathed in the soft, golden light of the setting sun. For a moment, I just stood there watching him, trying to gather the courage to approach. As if sensing my hesitation, he turned, a small, almost hesitant smile flickering across his lips. Hey, I replied, closing the distance between us. We stood there side by side, watching the sun dip lower over the horizon, the silence between us growing more charged with each passing second. I could feel the tension thrumming between us, an electric current that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Finally, he broke the silence. You ever wonder what would be like if things were different? His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. My breath caught, my pulse quickening as I tried to process his words. What do you mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at me, his eyes filled with a vulnerability I'd never seen before. I mean, what if we didn't have to pretend all the time? The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave, crashing over me with a force I hadn't been prepared for. There was out in the open, the unspoken truth we'd both been avoiding. I felt a strange mix of relief and fear, like standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between the safety of solid ground and the thrill of the unknown. Pretend, I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He took a deep breath, his gaze steady as he looked at me. Yeah, pretend that there isn't something between us, that every time I look at you, I don't feel more. The words hung between us, raw and vulnerable, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, filled with 1,000 thoughts and questions. But all I could manage was a single word, Ethan. He looked away, his jaw clenched as if bracing himself for the rejection he thought was coming. I know that's crazy. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm imagining it all, but I can't keep acting like it doesn't matter, like it isn't tearing me up inside. The vulnerability in his voice was almost too much to bear. I reached out my hand, hovering just above his arm, unsure if I should take that final step, but before I could decide, he turned back to me, his gaze intense, filled with something I couldn't quite name. Without thinking, I closed the gap between us, my hand brushing against his. The touch was barely more than a whisper, but it was enough to make my heart race. Enough to shatter the fragile barrier we'd been hiding behind for so long. His fingers closed around mine, hesitant but firm, and suddenly we were no longer just friends standing by the lake. We were something more, something undefined but undeniably real. Neither of us spoke. We just stood there, the silence thick and heavy, our hands entwined as we stared at each other. It was a moment suspended in time, a fragile bubble of clarity in a world filled with uncertainty. And in that moment, I knew whatever this was, it was worth the risk. But the tranquility didn't last. The weight of reality settled in, a gnawing reminder that this wasn't as simple as it seemed. I could feel the tension building again, the uncertainty and fear that had been lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was like standing at the edge of storm, feeling the electricity in the air, knowing that everything was about to change. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Ethan looked at me, his gaze filled with a mixture of hope and fear. I don't know, but I want to find out if you're willing to take the risk with me. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming at me to say yes, to take the leap and see where it led. But fear held me back. A relentless, nagging voice that whispered all the reasons this could go wrong, all the ways it could fall apart. I don't know, Ethan, I said, my voice trembling with the weight of my hesitation. This is new and scary. What if we mess everything up? He squeezed my hand, his grip reassuring, even as his own fear shone in his eyes. I'm scared too, but sometimes the best things are the ones we're afraid of. The sincerity in his words, the vulnerability he was showing me, was almost overwhelming. I felt a surge of courage, A flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work, but it was still terrifying, a leap into the unknown that could change everything we'd ever known. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I looked him in the eyes. "Okay," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, "I'll take the risk with you." A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that was equal parts relief and joy. And in that moment, all the fear, all the uncertainty faded away, leaving only the thrill of the unknown and the promise of something new. But the peace was short-lived. As we walked back from the lake, hand in hand, the weight of what we just agreed to began to sink in. This wasn't just a momentary decision. This was a change that would ripple through everything we knew, everything we'd ever been. It was exhilarating, but it was also terrifying, a realization that left us both feeling like we were walking a tightrope, balancing between hope and fear. As we reached his house, we stopped, the silence between us filled with 1,000 unspoken questions. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet determination that was both comforting and daunting. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice steady and sure, one step at a time. I nodded, clinging to his words, to the promise that we'd face this together. But deep down I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, moments of doubt and fear, times when we'd question if it was all worth it. But for now, all that mattered was that we were taking the first step, that we were daring to reach for something more. And as I looked in his eyes, I felt a surge of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, we could make it through. But I also knew in the depths of my heart that the story didn't end here. There was something about the quiet hours of the night that made everything feel sharper, more real. I lay there staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of Ethan, of everything we'd confessed to each other by the lake. I kept replaying the way he looked at me, the way his hand had felt wrapped around mine. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and I could feel every emotion in vivid detail, like my senses had been turned up to full volume. The silence stretched, and I found myself reaching for my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed out a simple message. "Can't sleep, you up?" It didn't take long for his reply to appear on my screen. "Yeah, same here." I didn't even hesitate before sending the next message. "Want to come over?" A few minutes later, I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I opened it, and there he was, standing on the other side, a quiet, nervous smile on his face. There was a tension in the air, a silent understanding that this wasn't just a casual visit, that we were both here because of something deeper. We didn't say much at first, just an awkward laugh as he stepped inside. I led him to the living room, and we sat down on the couch, close enough that our knees brushed together. The touch sent a spark through me, a reminder of all the unspoken things hanging between us. He glanced at me, his gaze intense, and I could feel my pulse quicken, my heart racing as the silence grew. "So you wanted me to come over?" he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I swallowed, nodding as I tried to steady my breathing. Yeah, I guess I just didn't want to be alone with all these thoughts. The words came out softer than I intended, a confession that seemed to hang in the air between us, filling the space with something heavy and meaningful. He reached out his hand, finding mine, and I could feel the warmth of his skin against mine, the subtle press of his fingers, a grounding force in the midst of the storm raging inside me. We sat like that for a long moment, neither of us daring to move, to break the fragile balance of the moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low murmur that sent a shiver down my spine. I haven't been able to stop thinking about that night at the lake. It's like everything changed, you know? I nodded, the words catching in my throat. "I know, I feel it too." He leaned in, his face close to mine, and I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and steady. My heart hammered in my chest, a wild, frantic beat that seemed to echo in the quiet of the room. Every nerve was alive, every inch of me aware of his presence, of the weight of this moment. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached up, his fingers brushing against my cheek in a touch so soft it was barely there. I felt my breath hitch, my pulse quickening as he leaned in, his lips hovering just a breath away from mine. There was a tension in his gaze, a silent question that hung between us, waiting for an answer. I didn't think, I didn't question, I just closed the distance between us, my lips pressing against his in a kiss that felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff, surrendering to the free fall of something unknown and terrifyingly beautiful. His lips were warm, soft against mine, and I could feel a faint tremor in his hands as they settled on my shoulders, holding me close. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, as if we were both afraid of shattering the moment, of losing the fragile connection we'd finally found. But slowly the tension melted away, replaced by a warmth, a sense of belonging that felt as natural as breathing. His hands moved to my back, pulling me closer, and I felt a surge of emotion, a sense of rightness that I couldn't explain. We pulled back, breathless, our foreheads pressed together as we tried to catch our breath. I could see the same mixture of relief and wonder in his eyes that I felt. A silent acknowledgement that we'd crossed a line we could never go back from, but in that moment I didn't care. All that mattered was that he was here, that we were together, and that we'd finally given into the thing we'd both been fighting for so long. "Wow," he murmured, his voice soft and filled with a kind of awe that made my heart swell. I didn't expect that. I laughed, a breathless sound that felt like a release, like letting go of all the tension that had been building for months. Me neither, but it feels right, doesn't it? He nodded, his gaze steady as he looked at me. Yeah, it does. For a while, we just sat there, tangled together on the couch, our bodies intertwined, our hearts beating as one. The quiet of the night enveloped us, wrapping around us like a warm blanket, soothing our souls. I felt a deep, comforting calm settle over me, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. In his embrace, time stood still. Our connection transcended words, speaking directly to our hearts. Every moment with him filled me with assurance, dispelling fears of the unknown. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what might come next. I wasn't afraid of the future's uncertainties and surprises, because whatever lay ahead, I knew we'd face it together, hand in hand. Our love shining brighter than any obstacle. But as the minutes passed, reality began to creep back in, a faint reminder that this wasn't as simple as we wanted it to be. I could see the worry in his eyes, the same thoughts that were beginning to tug at the edges of my mind. This was real, and it was happening, but it also meant that everything was about to change. He must have sensed my unease because he tightened his hold on me, his voice a soft reassurance in the quiet. We'll figure out. Whatever happens, we'll figure out together. I nodded, grateful for the comfort of his words, even though I knew it wouldn't be that easy. We'd have to navigate this new reality, find a way to make it work without tearing everything apart. And as much as I wanted to believe it was possible, there was a part of me that couldn't shake the fear of what might come next. We stayed like that for a while longer, wrapped in each other's arms, the world fading away as we lost ourselves in the warmth of the moment. But eventually the quiet grew heavy again, the weight of unspoken questions and unresolved fears settling over us like a shadow. Do you think people will understand?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He looked at me, his gaze steady, filled with a kind of determination that made my heart ache. "I don't know, but I don't care. As long as we're together, that's all that matters to me." His words hit me with a force I hadn't expected, a reminder of the strength we'd found in each other, of the courage it took to face the unknown together. And in that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them side by side, hand in hand, no matter what. The night stretched on, each moment filled with a quiet intimacy that felt both new and familiar, like coming home after a long journey. And as I lay there, my head resting on his shoulder, I felt a sense of peace, a certainty that this was where I was meant to be. But as the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, reality came crashing back, a reminder that this perfect moment couldn't last forever. We'd have to face the world eventually, to step back into the lives we'd left behind. And I knew deep down that it wouldn't be easy. He shifted beside me, his gaze thoughtful as he looked out at the rising sun. We'll take it one day at a time, he said, his voice a quiet promise in the early morning light. No matter what happens, we'll figure it out together. I nodded, a sense of calm washing over me as I looked into his eyes, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them as one. And in that moment, I knew that we were ready to face whatever the world might throw our way. But the story didn't end there, because there was still so much left to discover, so many moments yet to unfold. And as we stepped into the morning light, hand in hand, I knew that our journey was only just beginning. As the days passed, life seemed to slip into a strange rhythm. Ethan and I were no longer just friends, but we hadn't fully defined what we were either. It was a delicate balance, and every moment together felt like walking a tightrope between the old and the new. We'd navigate the day with subtle smiles and small glances, sharing looks that no one else would understand. Each time we brushed past each other, every shared laugh felt like a promise, a reminder of the night that had changed everything. But it didn't take long for the cracks to appear. One evening, as we were sitting in his room, the air between us thick with all the words we hadn't yet said, I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest, a creeping fear that seemed to be growing stronger with every passing day. I tried to ignore it, to pretend that it was just nerves, but it lingered, a nagging voice in the back of my mind that refused to let me relax. Ethan must have sensed it because he looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his hand reaching out to touch mine. I forced a smile, trying to brush off the worry I knew was written all over my face. "Yeah, I'm fine, just thinking." His eyes searched mine, and I could tell he wasn't convinced. "Thinking about us?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The fear was there, gnawing at me, filling my mind with doubts I couldn't shake. What if things went wrong? What if this delicate balance we'd found shattered under the weight of reality? He sighed, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I know it's scary," he said quietly. "I think about it too, but we can't live in fear. We've come this far because we wanted something more, something real." I looked at him, his words resonating with a truth I couldn't deny. This was real, more real than anything I'd ever felt before. But that didn't make it any less terrifying. What if? I hesitated, my voice trembling as I struggled to find the right words. What if it doesn't work out? What if we end up hurting each other? He held my hand, squeezing it gently. He admitted, his voice soft but steady. But we could also end up building something amazing. We'll never know unless we try. His words settled over me, a quiet reassurance that cut through the fear. He was right. There were no guarantees, no way to know what the future would hold, but in that moment, with him beside me, I realized that maybe the risk was worth it. We fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled with words. He leaned back, pulling me closer until my head was resting against his shoulder. I could feel his heartbeat, steady and calm, a rhythm that matched the slow rise and fall of his breathing. It was a small thing, but it grounded me, reminding me that no matter what came next, we'd face it together. As the weeks turned into months, the fear began to fade, replaced by a sense of certainty that grew stronger with every passing day. We carved out a new normal, finding ways to be together without raising suspicions, stealing moments when no one else was around, sharing quiet laughs and stolen glances that spoke volumes without saying a word. But eventually the pressure of keeping it all hidden began to weigh on us. It was exhausting pretending to be something we weren't, hiding the truth of who we were from everyone we cared about. I could see it in his eyes, in the way he'd go quiet sometimes, a sadness lurking just beneath the surface. One afternoon, as we were sitting by the lake, I could tell he was lost in thought, his gaze distant as he stared out at the water. I reached out, placing a hand on his arm, and he looked at me, his expression filled with a mix of frustration and longing. "We can't keep doing this forever," he said quietly, his voice tinged with a sadness that made my heart ache. "Hiding, pretending, it's not fair to either of us." I nodded, knowing he was right. The secrecy had been thrilling at first, a game we'd both enjoyed playing, but now it felt like a weight, a burden that was slowly wearing us down. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He took a deep breath, his gaze steady as he looked at me. I think it's time we stop hiding. I want to be with you, really be with you. And I don't want to keep pretending that we're just friends. The words hung between us, heavy with meaning, and I felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of fear and relief that left me breathless. This was what I'd wanted, what we'd both wanted, but it was also a step into the unknown, a leap of faith that could change everything. Are you sure? I asked, my voice trembling as I searched his face for any sign of doubt. He nodded, a small, determined smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I'm sure. I don't want to live with regrets. And if that means facing whatever comes our way, then I'm ready. His words filled me with a sense of courage I hadn't known I had, a strength that grew with each passing second. I realized then that this was what love felt like, real, messy, complicated, and absolutely worth every risk. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, making plans, figuring out how we'd navigate the challenges ahead. There would be people who wouldn't understand, obstacles we'd have to face together, but I knew deep down that we could handle it together. We were stronger than anything that might try to pull us apart. The days that followed were filled with small, brave steps. We told our closest friends first, testing the waters, gauging their reactions. Some were surprised, others supportive, but the relief of finally being honest was worth every moment of uncertainty. Eventually, we told our families, a daunting step that took every ounce of courage we had. There were questions, difficult conversations, moments of doubt, but in the end, we found a way through it. It wasn't easy, but it was real, and that was all that mattered. As the months turned into years, the fears that had once held us back seemed distant, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from knowing we'd faced the hardest parts together. We built a life piece by piece, creating something beautiful from the fragile beginnings of a friendship that had grown into something deeper. Looking back now, I can see how far we've come, how much we've grown. There were times when I wondered if it was worth it, if all the challenges and sacrifices would pay off in the end, but standing here now with him by my side, I know without a doubt that it was. Every moment, every risk, every choice led us here. And as I look at him, I feel a sense of gratitude that fills me with a warmth I can't put into words. He was more than my best friend, more than the boy I'd fallen for in the quiet moments between laughter and silence. He was my partner, my anchor, the person who had stood by me through everything. Our story wasn't perfect, and it hadn't always been easy, but it was ours, built from the moments we'd shared, the challenges we'd faced, and the love we'd found in each other. And as I look toward the future, I know that whatever comes next, we'll face it together, side by side, because love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other again and again through every trial, every joy, every moment, and that more than anything is what makes it worth it. And that's the story of how a simple friendship transformed into something so much more, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones we least expect. Have you ever experienced a love that grew from friendship? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to LGBT Stories for more heartwarming and relatable gay stories just like this one. And don't forget to leave a comment letting me know what you thought of Ethan and his friend's story. Thanks for watching.